Yeah. What's going on, everyone? This is Jay at UFO Dripper, and today I'm going to showcase and share how I use the Belka Portal and how I think that you guys at home or wherever you may be is going to be able to best utilize the Belka Portal so that you can learn and grow together with the portal as you explore different brew methods, different recipes, and things like that. And so we earlier drew a few graphs, and I'm going to draw those graphs again later in a bit, but first I'm just going to showcase how the Belka Portal works and just in general what we're looking for when we use the portal to find out the different graphs that we can find in different brew methods and brew recipes and what EC is and what temperature is. So without further ado, let's get started. So we're going to need a little bit of coffee, of course. And for coffee, let's go with this Indonesian coffee. All right. You're going to want to just brew whatever way that you're used to brewing, right? So you don't want to do anything crazy. You don't want to do anything different than what you're used to, and so make sure you don't try anything different just because you're using this tool. You want to just really see how you used to brew and see what your brew method does and what your brew method shows with the portal, through the portal. So let's go ahead and grind some coffee. For the dripper, we're of course going to use the UFO V2, and I'm going to give this just a gentle, quick rinse here, and boom. So, how you use the portal is super simple. First, you turn it on. You turn it on by clicking this button here, and you open up your Belka Portal app, and it automatically connects once you connect it once, and so seamless connection. And then what you're going to want to do is place your dripper of choice on top of the portal, which of course if you're a UFO user, then if it's completely seamlessly, almost as if it's kind of designed together to a degree, which it was not. But anyway, yeah, and you would go about brewing as you normally would. Put your ground coffee in and tare. And once you've tared, you're going to want to record before you start to pour water. So you hit record, and now we're recording. And like I said, you just brew as you would normally. So this is a very simple recipe. I'm going to use the UFO Type A recipe, which is 45 grams every 30 seconds. The first 3 pours being circle pours and the last 2 pours being center pours. And the reason for this pour structure is so that we can provide the coffee bed a ton of energy in the first 3 pours through the circle pours, and then in the later stages we are really just trying to create balance in the cup with the 2 center pours. Also, the center pours are going to allow us to have a faster drawdown time compared to circle pour because we're not agitating the bed nearly as much. And so we can have a quick peek over at the Belka graph, the EC graph. So the blue line is going to be your EC, and the orange line is going to be your temperature. And the temperature is going to be the temperature output, as in the coffee, the brewed coffee temperature that's flowing through the Belka's EC meter. So as you can see, temperature is kind of continuing to increase, whereas EC is continuing to decrease, as it should, because in the later stages of the brew, there's only so much coffee stuff that we can extract in just regular ambient pressure. And so it's going to be limited as in how much EC can increase. So here we are starting with the very first of the 2 center pours in the later stages, and as you can see, we've extracted almost everything in the first half, and now heading towards the later stages of the brew, we are now seeing EC level drop, which the lower the EC, the lower the dissolved solids present in the cup. So we're going to pour all the way up to 225 grams. And also something else that's really interesting is that, generally speaking, the more percolation there is, as in the faster the drawdown speed, the more of a decline EC curve is going to be. So as you see here, especially with the UFO Type A filter, which is not a very fast flowing filter, you are going to see a dramatically reduced drawdown time as we get closer to the later stages of the brew, just due to fines migration. And without any interventions as to lifting up the fines or anything like that, or removing the fines or using a faster flowing filter, this is very, very natural. Matter of fact, this is one of the fun facts about the UFO Type A filters, is that it does do this. So you get a ton of just straight through percolation in the first half, and then as the brew progresses, you do get a little bit more immersion. And so we are done recording, and the Belka Portal app automatically saves everything. And so boom, here we have a graph. Now I can put a short caption in description of what I did. I can do type A, and I can put in coffee, which this is a Sumatra Gallo Indo coffee, so I'll just put it in Indo. And maybe I can also put in the grinder that I used. So 01 for Lagom 01, and then this was a pour over, because you can also use the portal for espresso as well. But yeah, there's coffee beans, other memos, yada yada yada. Super well thought out interface here. So this here is the graph. So as you saw, this is a base type A recipe, and like I said, in the first half, you see decreases, but right here where we start to move over to center pour, you see that EC is increasing, is rising as time goes on. So whenever you see EC rising like this, it means that there is a lot of water in the brew bed. It means that the flow through rate of water has dramatically reduced from the beginning. And so this is generally where we see a lot more of immersion occurring in the brew compared to percolation. So even if it is a full percolation brew, if you have a slower flowing filter, or a filter that doesn't allow a lot of fines to go through in the later stages of the brew, you may have a cup that has that bright acidity, that has that crisp acidity and clarity, but also with really nice sweetness and texture from the later half where a lot of immersion occurs. And this year I wouldn't worry too much about, unless the cup is tasting astringent. This brew finished at right around 3-minute mark. Anything over 3 minutes 30 I generally don't recommend, because there is when you will start to sacrifice a bit of that cleanliness for texture, and that's where a lot of these dryness and bitter astringencies may start to peek through. So while I don't worry too much about total brew time, I do think having a guideline of, okay, this is about the threshold of how far I'm willing to allow a brew to go, I do believe that to be a good general guideline for you to have for your own self. So we're done brewing this, and let's go ahead and have a quick taste. So put the Belka aside. Smells great. I know this coffee well. It's a beautiful, beautiful coffee. So really, really nice. Yeah, a lot of these like dried fruits, a little bit of chocolate, a little bit of nuts as well. It's not an incredibly complex coffee, but it's very, very sweet. Really, really well rounded cup. But anyway, let's go ahead and do one more brew. And here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do two single pours of 100 grams, also known as Patrick Rolf's April recipe. But I'm not sure what he's up to these days with different variations of the recipe, because Patrick does have a lot of different variations of his recipe that he does. And so primarily what I want to showcase with this brewing is what you may be able to find useful, right? There's so many different recipes that exist in the world. There's so many different recipes that you're going to be able to find on YouTube, but I really want you to be able to understand what these different recipes are trying to accomplish and what these different recipes are actually aiming to do, right? Because truth be told, I didn't understand this recipe for a long time. I wasn't sure why this recipe existed. Matter of fact, I thought this recipe was kind of too simple. I was like, oh, there's gotta be a way to extract more out of the coffee. I wonder why he's designed it this way, and it didn't make sense until I started to play around with Portal, because I found out that you are actually extracting a lot in the later stages of the brew, even though it seems like you're not. And how that is achieved, I'll show you once I have some data. All right, gonna grind some coffee, gonna grind a little bit finer than last time. And then I'm going to start a new log because this is a new brew. All right, here we go. Start record, and we are going to pour 100 grams. 50 circle, and then 50 center. Boom, 100 grams. And here, I'm just going to let this sit up until the 40-second mark. So this is going to give us a radically different EC graph than the first brew we did. We're also going to taste the differences in the cup, as in what are the sensory attributes that might exist to each recipe, and how we may be able to get an idea for what's happening in the brew through the EC curve. So again, 50 gram circle and 50 gram center, and I am done. That's it. It's as simple as that. So if you take a look at the EC curve, it is very, very, very different looking than the first brew that we did. So what you're seeing right now is you're not seeing a very defined step, like a stairway form, and instead you're seeing this very gradual increase and a very gradual decrease, and then an increase. It's increasing again. Now let's have a look at what's happening here. The EC is increasing. Remember what I told you about EC increasing and it having to do something with slower flow through? Have a look here. The brew bed, it is not flowing through very, very fast. It is flowing through really, really, really slowly. There's a ton of immersion brewing happening right now. There's a ton of extraction occurring right now through immersion, not just percolation. Sure, it is going through. Sure, we're using gravity. Sure, it is being filtered. But because the flow through rate is so slow with this recipe, there's a lot more immersion happening. So let's now come back to this. Finish drawing down. Let's come back to the graph. We're going to stop recording. And this all auto-save, so we can put in all the details later on. But nonetheless, let's go back to some of the logs that I've had. Let's see here. So let's not go there. Let's go over to my board and add list. No, we're not going to do that. Let's see here. Shoot. Let's see here. Inbox. Okay, here we go. So we did one brew here and one brew there. So we're going to take a look at this first. So if we take a look at this, you'll be able to see that there's a lot of different stairs that's formed, right? A lot of these like step downs. EC peaked all the way up at 5 and then it gradually started to decrease. Whereas we look at this graph and it looks very, very different. And This is really cool because we can just turn it into full screen if you just turn your screen horizontally. So have a look at that. Instead of an EC that's peaked at 5, we now have EC that's peaked at 2. Instead of those crazy stair formats, we now see boom, slight decrease, and increase, 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 increase. This is a very, very interesting brew format that is actually incredibly useful in different cafe situations where you have a lot of different staff that are brewing coffee, the same coffee, different coffees, but you're able to get a very similar looking EC curve every single time. Brew A, brew B, brew C, brew D, brew E, especially when you're using a dripper that's as consistent as the UFO. Because there's not a whole lot going on. There's not a lot of these like human involvements. This is a lot closer to cupping than it is to actual pour over brewing. And what this allows you to do is this allows you to get to 80, 90% of the coffee's potential every single time, regardless of who the barista is. And so, yeah, it's a super interesting cup. It relies much, much, much more on immersion than it does percolation. And I'm sure we're going to taste that in the cup. And so let's have a quick taste. Generally, brews from this recipe are a little bit more sweeter. It has a little bit more texture as well in the cup. And yeah, that's exactly that. Of course, we also have to take into consideration the fact that the first recipe, we had a total brew time of around 3 minutes. So because we had total brew time of 3 minutes, we of course extracted more, right? We extracted more in the first recipe, but if we're just taking a look at the preferences as to did this favor percolation or did this favor immersion, we can find out, we can guess that this brew favored a lot more immersion than it did percolation. And so regardless of the total TDS, which we can get to very similar total TDS levels simply by tightening the grind size with this recipe and allowing the brew to go longer, right? But that's not the goal with the portal. With the portal, what we're trying to find out is how do we get to the final cup? There's been tools, there's been TDS meters where we've been able to get to a number, right? We can log what the coffee we used, water temperature, grind size, filter, all of these things, but all we get is a final number. We never understood what and how we got to the final cup. Well, now with the portal, we can. We literally can dissect what happened, where, how much extraction occurred, by what percentage, right? We've always known in the past that the vast majority of extraction happens in the first 30 to 40-ish% of the brew, and that the later stage of the brew is just to kind of balance the cup out. And you're only extracting small, minute details that may exist, may not exist, or sometimes astringencies that may exist. And so we've had these different recipes that utilize bypass for that specific reason, where we may use a recipe, something like 20 grams of coffee to 150 grams of water, and then once you have this very, very, very high TDS concentrate, you just bypass. And the entire idea of that was that we are extracting only the good stuff, and the later stuff where the coffee may be prone to over extraction, we're not brewing. But now, with the portal, we can even probably find out where that threshold is, right? By having a look at the EC numbers. And so now I've shown you how I may be able to use this and some of the things that you may be looking for. And now what I want to do is I want to show you a few graphs, because I think this is where the Belka gets really, really fun. I think this is where at home or wherever you may be, even if you're preparing for a competition, I believe this is where the Belka Portal is truly, truly going to shine. Of course, for shop use, there's very, very obvious cases for usage for the Portal, which is going to be how consistent are your members brewing the coffees, right? How consistent is your barista A to barista B, right? By having a look at the EC, by having a look at their pouring habits, right? We're able to find exactly where those inconsistencies are coming from. But for a home user, we don't care about that. All we care about is how do we get to this tasty cup? And for competitors, all we're caring about is how do we present this competition coffee the best way we can? That way we can win the whole dang thing, right? And so let's have a look. I want to draw two different graphs and show you guys what may be happening and things that we may be able to possibly draw out from these graphs. So we're going to call this one graph number 1. And so I'm just going to draw this. Here is the EC curve. It's going up and then it's going down and then again down and then down like this. And then here we're going to have graph number 2. Graph number 2, up, down, boom. So you're probably going to be looking at this going, what is this and why is this cool? Here, I am going to make an assumption that more percolation occurred than immersion. And here, I am going to make an assumption that more immersion occurred than percolation. Why? Why might this be? It's because I know from these graphs, from countless logs that I've done, that when the pour through rate is slower, when the flow through rate is slower, the EC increases in between pulses. When the pour through rate is fast, when water is draining through the coffee bed quickly without any delays, EC decreases. EC decreases. EC decreases. When there's a lot of water in the brew bed constantly, EC increases. EC increases. EC increases. Just by looking at these two graphs, I am able to guess that in graph number 1, you probably used a fast flowing filter. Graph number 2, you probably used a slow flowing filter. I can also take a guess that in graph number 1, you had bright and clean and crisp acidity. Also, high clarity. Graph number 2, I can guess that you probably had a lot more sweetness and texture. Why? Because there was more immersion. Why? Because there was more percolation. So these are some of the ways that you can approach brewing. And now, what's also really, really fun is once you have enough of these logs, right? You're not limited to just this style of brewing. You're not limited to just this style of brewing. You can take portions of this and apply it into here. So say you have a cup that's got great acidity, great clarity, but you want a little bit more sweetness and texture. Then you might modify certain variables. That way you can combine these two and make it work together. So this is where the magic and the beauty of the Belka Portal is, in that it reveals the invisible. It allows you to see how you got to the final cup. Whether it's this or this, now with the portal, we are able to see what we weren't able to see in the past. And so that is how I've been using the Belka Portal, and that is how I think is the most fun way to approach using the Belka Portal, and this is how I think that we're going to be able to push the brewing science forward by creating more of these logs. Who knows, maybe in the next 10 years, the things that I believe to be true are going to be proven to be wrong. But something that I truly, genuinely believe in is that if you never contradict yourself, that's not a sign of consistency, that's a sign of lack of growth. So get yourself a portal, check yourself out, test your own self, and have a good look at how your brewing is getting to the cup results that you've been producing. And with that, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch all y'all next time. Deuces.